everyone. This is Bill Griffin. Welcome to Different Take Podcast. If you like this content, please subscribe, like, share, comment. Really appreciate you watching. New episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Mr. Zach Procter. He's GOP candidate for Georgia House of Representative, District 101. Mr. Procter is a practicing attorney and resident of Lawrenceville, Georgia. He has been a resident of Georgia for 30-some years and is married with two daughters. And thank you for doing this, sir.
Of course, Bill. Thank you for inviting me.
Zach, we get started by, if you could tell us about your district.
Sure. 101, I call it the heart of Gwinnett County because it is right smack in the middle of the county. It's the Collins Hill School District, almost the entire district, with a little bit of the two districts to the east and the west. If you think about the wedge between 316 and 85, our district makes up a lot of that little wedge there between Lawrenceville-Swanee Road and Buford Drive. And it also helps, they did shape it somewhat like a heart, so it goes well with the heart of Gwinnett County theme. That's a little bit of a stretch, but kidney of Gwinnett County didn't test as well in focus groups, so I stuck with heart of Gwinnett County.
Well, these aren't any certain priority. I'll ask you about priority, but so one of the big issues the last session was the idea of school choice, K through 12. What do you think about this?
I think that that's something we really should have gotten done last session and is going to be one of my top priorities coming up. My girls actually already benefit from school choice. My wife is a teacher at Mill Creek High School, and because of the logistics of getting them to school in the morning, doesn't have anything to do with the quality of the school or anything. Collins Hill has got good schools as well, but it's a whole lot easier for us to get them to school by having them ride with my wife in the morning and get on the bus at Mill Creek and ride to that cluster's elementary schools. And that's a choice that I think all teachers in Georgia, all parents in Georgia need to have, whether it's because of the ease of being able to get their kids to school or just having the right fit for their kid, getting the best education they possibly can.
So the idea is that parents would get a voucher, also maybe move within, I guess there's limits to different ways of doing it, but they could move within the public school system or take a voucher, move their child out of the public school system. And so what would you think would be an appropriate amount? Say, for example, it costs $10,000 for the government per pupil. What would that voucher amount, what do you think it ought to be?
I would say a significant portion of that amount. I don't know if it should be the whole amount, but it should definitely be a large portion of what that allotment would normally be. Competition has proven itself to be a good thing in every industry that we see it in. But the two industries we seem to think that it isn't going to work are education and healthcare. And I don't know why we've decided that those two, that it wouldn't work. If we have parents having the ability to take those funds and put them towards the school of their choice, whether that be homeschool, public school, or private school, we'll see more competition. We'll see schools striving to make sure that they're providing the best service possible to attract those kids. And we'll probably see pop-ups of new private schools to give more options.
I think you make a good point. For better or worse, the government education system, the students learn what the government wants them to learn. So if parents have options, it would seem more likely that the students would learn what they need to learn.
Well, I think it would also facilitate more involvement by parents in the kids' situations because they will have that option, and it gives them an incentive to look into what is my child learning? How is my child learning? So that they can make those decisions. And just by the virtue of learning more about it, that's going to lead to them getting more involved. A large priority also for me is going to be having a lot more involvement by parents in their student school. And I think that we need to expand, where possible, the actual size of school boards. Because right now we have only a few school board members for an enormous school district here in Gwinnett County, for example. And I think we need to have a larger school board so that they are representing fewer constituents each, so that there can be more interaction between those students, between those constituents and the members of the school board. Now, I've heard some feedback from members of school boards that say, well, hey, it's hard enough to get anything done with the number we have. But the issue is not about how easy it is for them to do their job. It's how well can they do their job and how much involvement can parents have.
Ostensibly, it'd be more representation. I mean, it's a fact that there would be just less people each board member would represent. What's the resistance as you talk to people?
The resistance I've seen, like I said, a member of the school board told me, well, hey, that's going to make it harder for us to get decisions through. It's going to be more time debating things. I don't really see that as a reason not to pursue this. The other feedback I've heard is kind of a knee-jerk reaction from some people saying, oh, well, this is going to disenfranchise, because right now they think that Republicans are suggesting this kind of thing because they think we're reacting to the fact that in Gwinnett County, especially, there have been a lot of Black members elected recently. And that's not the case at all. I think that those same members would probably be reelected, and the new members that we add may also turn out to be Black. It doesn't matter, as long as the people in the district, and it being a smaller number for each one, are the ones electing those folks. That's who we want on the school board.
What's the resistance to school choice?
The resistance to school choice, I think, are people who are just very wedded to the way things have been done for decades. They see the public school system as being one where the government has a responsibility to educate children, and they have a mandate to determine how those kids are educated. And they don't want to see a wide variety in that. They want to see everyone educated exactly the same. They want a one-size-fits-all education system. And I just don't think that that works.
One of the big issues in Florida, they codified this, that the idea that there couldn't be this teaching of anti-racism or components of critical race theory. I don't know exactly I don't recall the exact language, but there's that. And there's also, they codified the idea that K-3 teachers can't discuss the subject of sexual orientation with the pupils. Do you think Georgia ought to do those two things?
I'm a federalist at heart, so I want to see government decisions being made at the most local level possible. So in expanding school boards and having more representation on school boards, I'd like to see those decisions made at that local school board level, because there may be parts of Georgia where folks do say, yes, absolutely, teach our children that. And other parts where they say, no, we don't agree with that. We don't want it taught. And I think that under our system of government, that's the way it should be. We should be able to have that being done in some areas where the constituents want that, and not done in other areas.
I interviewed a Democrat candidate for different district, but same position in the legislature and the House. Their comment was that if you codified particularly the subject of discussing sexual orientation, that it would be potentially discriminatory.
I'm not really worried about that being discriminatory.
And sorry to interrupt, but I'm not sure it's clear about that. I guess what he was saying was you can't allow school boards. He was saying you can't even allow school boards to, on their own, not to. He went the reverse. In other words, you have to codify that you can discuss it.
The left seems to forget that there are things that we have all agreed on for many, many years that you do not discuss with young children. We don't show them pornographic material. We don't show them graphically violent material. We don't change that just because it suddenly becomes a fad in social circles. I don't think that we should be making broad laws about what you can and cannot do or say in a school district, especially on a state and definitely not a national level. That is something that should be allowed to evolve over time, which is something that can be done at a local level. That way, if there is something that we don't want discussed now, but sometime 20 years from now, if the community says, no, we think that's okay now, that can be changed. It can be done much more dynamically if it's being done on the most local level possible.
One more question about the concept of school choice. It's kind of, some people say, I guess is a sort of a softball question, but I don't really ask questions I don't consider myself a journalist. I'm a constituent that asks questions and and just bounces things off of people to see, where they're thinking, and hopefully people get something out of it. Do you find it ironic that the same people that are so against school choice for public schools are perfectly fine with, are the government subsidizing college tuition, and there's no limitation on where you would go to college?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that the reason you see that is because they've already won the battle when it comes to universities. Universities have largely become left-wing indoctrination centers. So they are perfectly happy with subsidizing sending people there because they know what they're going to be taught and they agree with it. When it comes to homeschooling, when it comes to private schools, well, they don't know what are going to be taught there. And so they want to make sure that they get their ideology implanted in the minds of children, which they know they can do in college, but they don't know that they can do it if you're homeschooling or sending your kids to a charter school or a private school.
It's something that's not said out loud, but it's clearly a motivation.
Yes.
I'll bounce around different subjects. What can or should the state do about high crime, particularly Metro Atlanta?
Well, there's several things we need to do. Number one, we have got to make sure that we are not being overly tolerant of drugs. We've got a lot of metro counties that are decriminalizing marijuana, which there are pluses and minuses to that. But we are sending a message, even just with marijuana, that maybe drugs aren't that bad. We've got a huge epidemic of fentanyl flowing into this country, which is extraordinarily dangerous. It can get people hooked very quickly. It can kill people very quickly. And a lot of people don't even know that they're taking it. I've done a lot of work. I was a prosecutor, and I have done a lot of criminal defense work. And I have had a lot of clients who will call me up and say, hey, I'm being brought in on a violation of probation. They are saying that I have cocaine in my system, or I have methamphetamine in my system, or fentanyl in my system. I swear all I've done is smoke some weed. Well, you've got dealers out there who are taking lighter drugs like marijuana, and they're lacing it with these methamphetamines, with fentanyl, because it gets them a bigger high and it is addictive. And that means they're going to have repeat customers. And you've got people who are ODing because they don't know that they are inhaling fentanyl when they're lighting a joint. We have got to crack down on the flow of fentanyl into this country and into this state. Obviously, there's not a whole lot that on the state level we can do about the border. I've joked that it'll help stop the flow of illegal immigrants into Georgia if we just show signs with Stacey Abrams south of the border saying that Georgia is the worst state to live in. She can do the advertising, say, hey, go to a different state, because Stacey apparently doesn't like it here. But we have got to make sure that these drugs are stopped. If that means more enforcement, new detection technologies, we need to invest in those. On top of that, we've got an epidemic in this state, not alone across the country, of low morale in police departments. Retention is at an all-time low, and it's because a police officer who works for pennies and puts their lives on the line doesn't feel like the community respects them and appreciates them, and doesn't feel like the government for whom they work is going to support them. If something goes wrong, you're going to have a mayor who wants headlines throwing them under the bus immediately without even knowing all the facts. We've got to turn the tide around on that so that we keep good officers on the streets to help enforce the law.
One of the things you highlight on your website is the issue of mental health. What do you think the state's role is on that, and what things should the state be doing to improve the mental health of citizens?
Well, the problem really is that the state's role used to be much, much larger when it came to mental health. And then around the 50s and 60s, we decided as a society that mental health hospitals were not a good thing. There was a anti-psychiatry movement that came about. The book that then became the play that then became the movie, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, created a idea of mental health hospitals that were abusive and that were involuntarily treating people who didn't really need treatment. And so we decided we were going to shut down and stop administering these hospitals. I have had many, many clients over recent years who had serious mental health problems. And because of those mental health problems, they couldn't maintain a job, so they were in poverty. Some of them, they were adults, but their parents still had guardianship over them because they couldn't take care of themselves. And those parents would call me in tears saying they don't know what to do because they're aging. Their adult child is now physically larger than them and is prone to violent outbursts. They cannot handle them, but they don't have the money to put them in a private facility. They can't get them the help they need. And they end up having to call the police and end up having to prosecute a crime against them because a criminal conviction is the only way to force them to get treatment. And even then, they can only really force them to get outpatient treatment because there is not a long-term residential mental health care facility in the state of Georgia for the indigent. There's plenty if you've got the money to pay for it. But if you do not have that money, you might be able to send them somewhere for a week, maybe even a month, but then they're going to be right back where you were. They're not going to take their medications. They're not going to do their follow-up treatments, and there's no way to force them. That's why we end up with such overcrowded jails due to the mental health epidemic. And the same goes for addiction. Addiction is a form of mental illness, and we've got to treat that. You have to have the carrot and the stick because you do have to charge people with a crime when they've committed one, because you've got to be able to then use that to force them to get the treatment that they need. You can't just ignore that a crime was committed and just send out a social worker instead of a police officer and hope to get a good outcome. You need to have a cooperation between mental health and the police departments to hopefully contain a dangerous situation and then turn it over to get the treatment that's needed in order to protect that person and the other people around them.
It seems that would be an issue that both parties could agree upon.
You would think so, yes.
Do you agree with that?
Times,
are there other issues that you think that Democrats and Republicans can agree on? It sounds like that one would be ideal to get some sort of agreement.
Oh, absolutely. And that one, there is a lot of agreement. There is some resistance at times because you do get some people who feel that involving law enforcement in any way is a non-starter. You get people who feel that, well, if we just put services out there, then people will flock to them. If you build it, they will come. from Field of Dreams, and that's just proven not to be the case. You've got to have positive and negative incentives to actually get in and get the treatment, both for just mental health and also for addiction. Otherwise, the number of homeless rises, the number of crimes rise, and the population in the prisons rise. As far as other issues where we can find agreement, I think there should be a lot. I think that a lot of times both sides have a tendency to kind of have a knee jerk of, hey, I hear an idea from somebody who's on the other side. Well, I'm automatically going to be against it. Let me think of a position to have that opposes that. We've got to end that. We need to keep in mind both sides have the same goal in mind for the most part. We all want the happiest, healthiest, safest lives possible for everybody in our communities. What we disagree on usually is just the policies that are going to get us there. Do we do X, Y, and Z to make sure that that's done, or do we do A, B, and C? We want the same thing. We just need to have more discussion and interaction on how we actually achieve those.
Let me ask this. Should the state mandate for all its employees diversity, equity, inclusion training?
Oh, absolutely not. The state should not be mandating any kind of ideological or way of thinking upon its employees, upon its students, anyone. States should provide and states should protect. States should not mandate.
Should the state prohibit? I mean, all the public schools rely on state funds. Should they prohibit diversity, equity, inclusion training for public school teachers?
Again, I don't think it should be prohibited. I think that that's something that should, again, be left up to the local level. If the local community wants that for their teachers, sure, go ahead and offer it. Now, I mean, obviously, there's got to be a little bit of oversight. We don't want state dollars going to teach something that's just completely off the wall. We don't want them to be teaching something that is going to end up in discrimination against students or anything along those lines. But for the most part, we need a hands-off approach when it comes to the state level with what we're doing down at the local level.
So the state tax rate, the highest marginal individual rate is 5.75%. The corporate tax rate is 5.75%. I could be wrong about this, but I think it's been at that level for many, many years. Do you think that should be changed?
Absolutely. I want to do away with state income tax. I believe that, like Tennessee, Florida, and Texas, we would be better off with a consumption-based tax. The best thing about that, you keep more of your paycheck, you get to decide where you spend it. And really, the best thing about the whole thing, all the drug dealers that I see coming through court, they pay as much taxes as everybody else when we have a consumption tax. Right now, they're not paying a penny in income tax because they're not reporting any of it, but they are spending it. And when they spend it, they're going to have to pay sales tax. So they'd be paying the same rate as everybody else.
There's also the IRS, the tax code is so complicated. You can't complete your Georgia return without doing your federal return. It seems like you'd have a happier populace if you didn't have to deal with filling out a return.
Absolutely. That would relieve a lot of stress every year for a lot of Americans. I definitely would be in favor of a flatter, simpler tax code. I'm a big fan of the fair tax. If you remember John Linder and the book that he wrote many years ago, I think that that would be a much better system for the country as a whole. Obviously, being on the state level in the state house, that's not something that I would get a say in. However, that is definitely something that I would support in the long run.
One thing that's probably going to come up again, you're a bit younger than me, so probably in your lifetime, maybe not mine, is when the next big virus comes along. The logic, I think has to be, well, the shutdowns we all experienced in 2020. I mean, in California, I was just there. They're still wearing masks in certain places. 2.5 years. Yeah.
After
So
the CDC has said that they never really did much good, and now definitely don't do any good.
yeah, well, but the logic has to be that they have to be imposed because they were good. They provided a benefit for many people. And the way this went down in Georgia is the counties initiated the restrictions, and then the state followed on. Then took by doing so, the legislature gave the governor the power to prevent counties from reimposing restrictions. So how do you think that ought to play out the next time, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, or something?
Well, I think we made a big mistake. Now, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not even a doctor. I'm the only male in my immediate family who's not a doctor. I'm the black sheep that went on to law school instead. But my feeling on it is that we made a mistake in deciding to shut everybody down. What we should have done instead was identify who was at the greatest risk, who was immunocompromised, and quarantine them while the virus burned itself out through the rest of the populace who was not really at risk. I think we would have seen far fewer deaths. There obviously still would have been some, because there would have been some people. We saw some people that seemed perfectly healthy that ended up succumbing. But the vast majority of people we saw dying were those who were elderly or who were immunocompromised for one reason or the other. If we had been able to isolate those people and then let the virus run its course, they might have been safe. And then our economy would have kept going. We would have had far less collateral damage than we ended up doing to ourselves with the course that we took. And I think we need to keep that in mind next time.
Do you think the counties ought to have the power to impose these restrictions on their own?
Well, again, I don't like it, but I have to be consistent. I do want to see decisions made at the most local level possible. And so while I understand the governor making the prohibition against forcing masks upon people at the county level, I have to say that I do think that that is something that should be left up to the counties. And, I would just be hoping that I'm living in a county that they don't do that. And, people have the right to vote with their feet and move to a place where their values are expressed. And so if you're living in a county that does not handle these kind of things the way you want to, you can look to go somewhere else.
That's hard to argue with.
Oh, you can try. Come on.
Oh, the thing, I mean, you're correct. People vote in, they know this is a possibility. I don't know that most people think about it that way. They probably are thinking, well, this is a once in a lifetime thing. It'll never happen in my lifetime, so I'm not worried about it. Although
And hopefully
you
they're
have
right.
children, you ought to be worried about it, or grandchildren. But I was going to just kind of get your thoughts on this. The people at the county level, I guarantee you, all 5 commissioners in Gwinnett County were completely on board with these shutdowns because they've never voiced any objection to it whatsoever. And the thing I find interesting is if you were to ask them, well, what's the benefit? Can you quantify the benefit? They would throw their hands up and say, we don't have the resources to determine that, but we have the power to impose the restrictions, but we can't tell you whether there was a benefit or not.
I think we had a bit of a perfect storm with coronavirus because of the political atmosphere in America at the time. We were so polarized that whatever Donald Trump recommended, the entire Democrat Party as a whole was going to react against, no matter what. And then once Republicans saw that reaction, then they dug in on the other side. And I think that if we were not in that kind of situation, if things were more like they were 10 years earlier, there probably would have been a lot more open discussion and people willing to think more critically about, okay, what might work, what might not work, what kind of experimentation might we do, instead of just picking a side and digging in and saying, I don't care what the evidence says one way or the other. If you question this, you're one of them and not us. We've got to get past this us and them mentality.
What do you, with the election laws that were passed last year, there's you can request without an excuse, you can request a mail ballot. And so you can vote by mail. I know many people that will say, and I've interviewed Democrats and I've told them there's no guarantee that the person who gets their ballot will cast the ballot in secrecy. They may observe or coerce or intimidate other people. And their comment back to me is, well, there's no evidence to support that. But it's an unknowable thing. You can't possibly know it. I confront them with that, and of course, well, you can't prove it, so it's okay. And they value the convenience of voting over what used to be called the sanctity of the secret ballot. So, do you think this law ought to be redone so that that people vote in person?
I definitely think that this was a good step in the right direction. I would love to see more in-person voting. So I think that we should go back to having to show some kind of cause in order to get a mail ballot. I don't think it needs to be anything. It doesn't need to be a big hurdle to get over. I mean, just the saying, hey, the convenience, I'm not good at driving, I don't like to drive, please mail me a ballot. Something like that may be enough. But I think, especially with all the early voting we have now, and early voting in most counties, there are multiple locations spread out across the county that you can go to vote. There's very little need for a lot of people to have mail-in ballots. Now, people who are going to be out of town, people who are hospitalized or don't have the mobility, sure. And those would be legitimate reasons. But I think that it's important to have as many people as possible go in person and cast their ballot. The drop boxes, I think, are still a bad idea. It's better at least that they're inside and are being supervised now, though no one is actively watching. I don't know why we need a drop box. Why not just hand it to a person? If you're going to have to go inside anyway, why not do that? So I think we've got a long way to go. You've got a big divide between people in this country about what were the issues in 2020? Was the outcome legitimate? Was it not? It doesn't matter at this point whether the result we got in 2020 was legitimate because it's in the books. What is important is that there is a lot of very good reason for a lot of people to doubt whether their vote was counted, whether it was a legitimate outcome. And we should never have those kind of legitimate concerns about an election. What we have to do is make sure that we look at any issues there were and make sure that we take care of those in the future. But we've got to walk a very fine line because we want to make sure that we can verify, but we do also want to protect that sanctity of the anonymous ballot. We don't want to have a database come out showing exactly who voted for who or voted for what. Because as we've talked about already, there's a lot of extreme partisanship going on right now, a lot of volatility. And I don't want to see a situation where people don't like a certain candidate and then release a list of here's all the people who voted for this candidate. I want you all to ostracize them and not patronize their businesses or anything along those lines. So we have to walk that line, and I'm not sure exactly how we do it, but we need to put heads together and we need to figure it out.
It seems to me it would be that whichever side loses has confidence that they legitimately lost. It seems that to me is far more important than convenience or whether or not
Yes.
you stood in line for an hour or something. What do you
You
think?
know, I joked years ago that eventually we're going to see a situation where somebody sues for having lost an election because it hurt their feelings. And I think we're getting dangerously close to that now.
So I want to ask you about climate change because it's something that there may or may not be things that state policies they enact because of this belief that climate change is a threat to
An
humanity.
existential threat.
What do you think?
Well, I actually just finished reading a fascinating book by Michael Schellenberger called Apocalypse Never. He is someone who believes that climate change is real, that it is man-made, and it is a problem that we need to address. But he believes that all of the apocalyptic rhetoric that is put out there by a lot of the climate change advocates is not only wrong, but it's highly counterproductive to any efforts to try to fix things. And he goes into a lot of detail about a lot of different aspects of it. And a big issue really is just a lack of understanding on behalf of really both sides. But in his analysis of it, really, it's talking about mainly the left, about they took some information from some studies, misconstrued it, and then it got repeated by various studies, repeated by various news outlets, and became talking points around the globe that we're looking at extinction level events and these kind of things when it's nowhere near the case. He talks about the rise in temperature, yes, may cause certain crops to die out, but it is also going to cause other crops to thrive better and in larger areas. So there's going to be a balance. What we need to do is make sure that we are not looking at this as something that we need to panic and we need to damage society in order to address a problem that is not nearly as grave as the rhetoric out there wants us to think. We need to look at things on a scientific basis, look at actual data. We need peer review to that data, and we need to come up with solutions that balance the economy and the ecology. He talks quite a bit about in South America, you've got deforestation happening because of the acreage needed for grazing cattle. And they restrict the way that you can graze cattle down there because they want this more organic and environmentally friendly methods that actually take up far more room, use far more water, and it's causing deforestation because they need more and more room. And that's then hurting the environment through that deforestation. At the same time, you've got initiatives in third world countries to bring in wind-based, solar-based energy when the efficiency of those is not there. The technology is not there yet. And it actually holds back those societies because they aren't able to get the level of energy that they need in order to develop. They would actually do better to use the so-called dirtier methods of energy production to be able to then more efficiently create goods and provide services to move their society forward to a point where then they can start looking at more ecologically friendly methods.
What do you think the state's role in this ought to be?
I think that where we can, we should see about using cleaner methods. Right now, we're building Plant Vogtle. We've been building Plant Vogtle for a long time, and looks like we're going to be building Plant Vogtle for a while longer. It's the only nuclear power plant currently under construction in the United States. There was a lot of scare that was spread around the country about nuclear power back from the 60s through the 80s. And it turned out that a lot of what people were scared of simply was not actually an issue. Nuclear power is the cleanest, most efficient, cheapest form of energy production that we currently have access to. We need a lot more of it in this country, and we can lead the way in Georgia by completing that plant and showing exactly what a benefit that really is.
You make a good point. I lived through that period, and that was the culture that remains today amongst the electorate that's in their 50s and over. Probably much less with younger people, I think.
Well, I'll tell you what, how old am I now? 43. And I know for a lot of people my age, strangely enough, a big factor in our attitudes toward nuclear power came from The Simpsons. One of the very first episodes of The Simpsons, they dealt with nuclear waste coming out of the power plant and mutating fish to have three eyes. And that made a huge impact on a lot of us who, believed for many, many years that there was radioactive waste that came out of those that harmed the environment. When really what's happening now with the new technologies is they bury that directly underneath the nuclear power plant in very safe methods, and it is never a danger to anyone.
Well, the risk to living in cold weather climate is probably far greater than whatever potential nuclear accidents.
Absolutely.
Yeah, cold weather
Although
is
we
much
do
more
have the
treacherous.
issue of if we do have climate change, if the globe gets warmer, that's going to mean fewer winter months in Chicago, which is going to be even more gang shooting. So we may actually end up with more deaths from that than we would have from rising seas.
What restrictions would you like to see regarding abortion? Where do you stand on that? I know that's something that's a lot of people don't understand. They think that it's been prohibited and so forth, and a lot of laws have changed in different states and so forth. Nothing has changed in Georgia.
I'm happy with the heartbeat bill, which was passed in the last term. I think that Georgia is in a good place now that the Dobbs decision has come down and the heartbeat law has been allowed to be implemented. Interestingly, I had a question earlier today from someone who heard a story about someone else who heard a story about someone else saying that this young lady had a miscarriage and was being told that she had to wait to schedule a procedure to remove the remains from her womb until a doctor had certified that she had not taken something to cause the fetus to be aborted. And I had to assure this person that no, that's not what Georgia's law says. Just like when there is a infant who dies from sudden infant death syndrome, there's always going to be an investigation in that case where probably, hopefully, the parents did not do anything wrong and this was simply a tragedy, but we have to look into it to be sure. And when it comes to a miscarriage where they suspect there may be some foul play that was done, someone getting some chemicals or medicine that they were not supposed to be taking in order to terminate that pregnancy or something along those lines, there would be less evidence of that than there would be in a potential homicide of a born baby. Possibly just blood work to see if there were any medications or anything taken, maybe a physical examination to make sure that there was no physical trauma that was done on purpose. I don't think it's something that would be very invasive at all. It's something that needs to be done to make sure that there was no foul play here. But I do not believe for a second that a hospital would delay the procedure to relieve her of the remains of her child while that was happening, because there would be no need to. It's not a crime scene where you've got to put up crime tape and keep it the same in order to do this. They're going to take care of, they're going to administer that care to their patient and then do what they need to do to make sure that there hasn't been any wrongdoing done there. I think Georgia's in a very good place. I think where we have issues right now is terrible misinformation that is being spread out there. Stacey Abrams is actively attempting to lie to the people of Georgia about what our law actually does. But she's got a history of that. She lied to us all about what the election laws do, and she lost us the MLB All-Star game, lost $10 million for small business owners who would have benefited from having that game because she wanted to score political points. We've got to stop scoring political points. at the expense of fear and mental trauma to the people that we're duping.
Or there was an interview that she did, and I listened very carefully, or I tried to, what politicians don't say. And she does not seem to indicate that there should be any restrictions whatsoever. And that was never Roe. That was never Roe versus Wade did that opinion. There was a balance. Is that? Do you understand her position to be something different? Because I haven't heard her express any sort of restriction.
I have not heard her express any kind of restrictions either. I certainly hope that at some point she agrees that that is a human life and should not be terminated, but I've not heard her make that distinction. If you look at the actual text of Roe versus Wade and what it actually did, it did restrict abortion. After the 20-week point, which at that time, the Supreme Court determined that that was the current medical opinion, that that was when that was a human life and should not be terminated. We've gotten new information now. The consensus is now that it is much earlier. We've got better detection methods so that people know that they're pregnant at an earlier time now. And so we've adjusted that. And that's what the Dodd decision did, was recognize that there has been an evolution in this and that it's something that should be left up for each state to decide.
And there may be states that are much more wide open than before. Roe versus
That's right.
Wade.
I expect that California and maybe New York are probably going to pass some laws that many other states are going to be appalled by.
Or countries.
Yes.
Around the world.
That's part of the irony of a lot of the backlash to Dodd, is that if you look at international abortion laws, Georgia is still very permissive.
Correct. What's a big topic, big issue, if we haven't covered it, that the legislature needs to deal with?
Well, as I've said, mental health, I think, is going to be a big one for me. That's something that I think we can have a huge impact in quality of life across our state if we can make sure that we are addressing that in a much more effective way. I think that when we tackle mental health, public safety, and education, we improve every aspect of our lives. People talk about wanting to address racism. We have a lot of talk the last couple of years of systemic racism in this country. Well, if you want to identify systemic racism, look at failing schools. People who are insisting that we've got to maintain the course the way public education has been done, they're the ones who are perpetuating a system in which poor children of color are unable to get ahead because they're not getting the level of education that will allow them to advance, allow them to claw their way out of poverty. And they're saying, nope, we are keeping them in there because that's the only way to do it. If we allow those kids to be able to find the best fit possible for them, that is going to open doors to mobility among society that will cure so many of our ills.
And my last question is, what are the big issues that you and your opponent disagree on? And before you answer that, I'd just like to say that seems like low-hanging fruit, the mental health.
Actually, mental health is one that he and I actually have a lot of agreement on. He and I have talked about it, and I think we agree quite a bit on what needs to be done. And we even agree a lot on how to get there, which, as I said earlier, a lot of times that's where Republicans and Democrats differ. We want to get to the same place, but we differ on how to get there. When it comes to mental health, he and I actually have a lot of agreement there. Where we differ more is when it comes to funding the police. I believe he is one that views a lot of folks who have run-ins with the law as victims of society rather than those who have done wrong. And as we talked about earlier, I think that's a dangerous way to go. You have got to hold people accountable for their actions, in addition to looking at, okay, why did they take this action? What are the underlying causes? Okay, let's address that, but you can't excuse it. You still have to let folks know, hey, you cannot harm others. You cannot take from others just because you feel like you've been dealt a bad hand. Find a way to deal with it in a positive manner.
Well, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, it was fun. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. Zach, how do people find you?
Well, I've got my website, zachprocterforstatehouse.com. And it's Zach spelled Z-A-C-H, and Procter is spelled P-R-O-C-T-E-R. Everybody wants to spell Zach with a K. Everybody wants to spell Procter with an O-R. So it's Zach Procter with an H and an E-R. I'm also on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter as Razor Catch Prey. It's an anagram of my name, Zachary Procter. Might be easier just to search for Zach Procter for State House. I've got that tied to that as well now. I've also got a account on Sync to Us, SYNCTOUS, and on there we post short videos talking about different issues. And at the end of each video, there's an opportunity to interact and share thoughts back with me so that we can have some back and forth and some dialogue about issues that a lot of times you don't get to have with a candidate.
Well, thanks again for doing this. I've been talking to Zach Procter, his GOP candidate for Georgia State House of Representatives, District 101. And really appreciate everybody watching. If you like this content, please subscribe, like, share, comment, and thanks for watching.